Hello, and welcome to Building the Impossible, the podcast for technical founders that asks the question, how do we get really big ideas from the lab to launch? I'm Jocelyn Houle. I'm a founder, investor, and tech leader who has spent my whole career bridging the gap between tiny startups and really large companies so both can innovate. Today's show, we're going to welcome Jim Anderson from Whisker Labs. Jim is a longtime startup leader, a founder, and author of 2 books on technology, the environment, and innovation. What really stood out to me in today's conversation was how today's new AI capabilities, sensors, cloud data, all work together to make it possible to create products with practical goals, such as preventing house fires, and at the same time, do something huge and game-changing, such as strengthening the entire electrical grid. So follow me on LinkedIn or check out jocelynhoule.com to subscribe to our newsletter. And remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Let's go to the show. Welcome, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Great to be here.
Well, I've known you for quite a while, but for the audience, can you just give us an introduction of yourself, what you're doing today, what you were doing before that?
Yeah, happy to. So my name is Jim Anderson. I work for Whisker Labs, the makers of Ting. Ting is a device that helps prevent fires in homes, but also monitors the electrical grid and can help prevent wildfires and make the grid more resilient and efficient, which is super important for the climate. I've spent most of my career, yeah, trying to do well by doing good, with focus on the environment, translating, the ideas of inventors and scientists, into marketable opportunities. So kind of, a climate or environmental entrepreneur in that regard.
That's great. I think that's really aligned to the audience of the show, who are the technical and scientific founders who are entering into like an innovation cycle that's unusual, right? Because these usually are very big ideas. And particularly in the energy and environment space, there's a requirement to scale pretty quickly. Um, you know, I kind of connected with you when you had written, I think, your second book, which was good enough
First
for the
one, first
Oh,
one.
the first one. Good enough for the climate.
Yes.
Excellent. And I think you interviewed a lot of like thought leaders in the environment space, entrepreneurs. You yourself have been an entrepreneur. And so I just wanted to sort of, when we're thinking about that progression, this is always what kind of fascinates me is like, what kind of magic trick is it where you come from a laboratory to a launch and then maybe get big enough for a government to adopt you or an entire massive institution or firm? Um, Tell me a little bit about your experience, because I feel like you've worked quite a bit at that left-hand side of the diagram, like where something's in the lab, it's just getting started. What have your observations been about what works or doesn't work at that critical moment?
Yeah, a bunch of things, and obviously we could unpack that a lot, but and it is magic. Like I think
Isn't
that's
it?
a perfectly good word. Like if magic is, you know, the creation of something kind of out of thin air that we can't explain, then uh, you know, taking a technology or a scientific concept, something that's in the lab, and turning it into a scaled business, uh, you know, ultimately is kind of magic. And a lot of times the things that we do, I think the way a cell phone works is magic. I certainly couldn't explain it on my own. I don't understand the technology. Most people don't. It's the collection of so many things that actually make it go. It's kind of beyond the ability of any single person to really understand, how it all works. Um, so, you know, I think, and we can kind of dig into this more. You know, when working with engineers and inventors, basically what I've done for the last 25 years is it's translating those technical ideas and concepts and capabilities into, you know, real marketable things and explaining them to lay people, explaining the magic to regular folks in a way that's compelling and understandable. And that's usually the hardest part.
Yeah.
Most
Yeah.
technologists I work with, really, really love their technology. And it's harder for them to think about the other aspects of it.
It is hard, and I think, it's tricky in these complicated, products, right? Where, really important subtleties can make all the difference and really be the moat for the whole product. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety on the part of technical and scientific founders that it's gonna get overly simplified. Can you kind of, if you were coming in with, new inventors, like, let's say I put you in a room, like, "Okay, here's 2 scientists who have a great idea." Kind of what would your methodology be? Where would you start to make sure that you're able to tell the story, but not leave anything out?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd say it's okay to leave a lot of things out, because most people that want to buy your product do not care. They care very little about the technology, and honestly, the technology is not going to last.
Can I
Yeah,
I wanna ask you a question about that because I feel like my whole career I've been in, like, the enterprise large scale data, AI space,
yeah,
right? This business, and I totally agree with you. Like, I care, but the buyer doesn't often care. I
yeah, they do
sort of
not.
feel I kinda have stars in my eyes, though, for, like, scientific endeavors, like saving the environment or producing more food so people don't
Yeah,
starve. I have, like, stars in my eyes, and I feel like maybe that's different. Maybe the buyer
no,
or the consumer there does care, but you're saying no.
no, they don't. No, I think yeah, it gets into more of the space of psychology, and how do any of us make decisions? Well, we make them, based on a story. And for that story to be compelling, it has to have a narrative. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has to be personal. Um, what's memorable? It's, stories that are personal, impactful, that have a narrative arc.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to stick with people. And it's not that this thing has 32 gigabytes of whatever, or that it has, it's precise to the third decimal place, or any of that. That is not what gets people to buy anything.
Mhm, mhm.
And ultimately, how is it solving? I have problems. I have limited time, money, or, whatever. Um, I've got problems I'm trying to solve. Well, how is this demonstratively going to solve that problem for me? So
Uh,
there, but even, that sort of implies the ROI. What's the ROI for the buyer? And even that gets a little murky. Like,
I think in the big stuff, if you have a really big idea that's way in the future, I feel like ROI is just a it's like this
yeah,
thing some customers want, so I say something, but it's much more of like, in like, the map where the dragons are after what we know.
yeah,
Like, we don't know. Um,
yeah,
let me
yeah.
ask you, let me ask you this, when you're thinking about maybe in your own experience, you may have had an, kind of do you have a company that you can think of or a group that you've worked with to kind of navigate this process?
Well, yeah, it's been my job for the last two companies, Whisker Labs and uh, Earth Networks before that, and AEM in between the two there, where, you know, we had really elaborate, highly technical products or concepts of products. And we would spend a lot of times, I run sales and business development, right? So I'm on the front end of it, really trying to figure out how do we distill this down to the essential set of ideas and messages,
Yeah.
stories
I'm gonna pause you there real
that
quick
are
though.
that are gonna resonate with customers, because at the end of the day, all the technical stuff is gonna kind of wash away, and they're gonna make a decision based on kind of very simple criteria. I would go, yeah. Here's the maybe this is a bit of a cheeky way to describe this, but basically, what I tell people, I tell my boss this, the CEO of our company, who's an engineer, um, and I say, uh, you know, Bob, you realize that I just am a stand-up comedian, right? Like I, with a PowerPoint deck, right? Like I take all of that really technical stuff and boil it down to something that either bombs or kills.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And right,
I
like,
get it.
and it's
No, I
gotta,
get you.
you know,
I thought you were
and
saying you take all the really depressing parts of life,
no,
i.e.
and it's
engineering, and turn it into something more fun for people to listen
and
to.
we have to, and that's telling a succinct story that's compelling for people.
I get you,
And
but
that's
yeah,
it's a kind of a cheeky way to say it, but you know,
people can't do it though.
and
That's what I've
yeah,
noticed in the last 20 years. And here's, I see all these very sincere technology scientific founders who want to tell you about their product. And
yeah,
then so many VCs and like go to market leads who are trying to do exactly what you say. You're like the same problem, right? They don't have the appetite to listen to the whole thing. And
yeah, they don't have time.
yeah, and I think
Yeah,
that's where a lot of good ideas, companies that could really succeed, maybe don't get picked up.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of great technology out there, but there's also a lot of different ways to solve a particular problem. So usually there's not uh, a unique, durable technical
Yeah.
advantage to something
Yeah.
like that can be eroded fairly quickly. Um, yeah, so you
Yeah, we
have
can talk a
to,
little bit about that too, because there's a sweet spot between ideation and then just
yeah,
operations, right? I've seen
right.
many mediocre technologies succeed on just getting out there.
Oh yeah,
But I think it's
yeah,
interesting if you are a founder listening to this. I think what I would suggest you take away from this is you need to spend some time with trusted advisors, with before you get your go-to-market lead in the room, before you get that VC in the room, you're going to have to kind of work out the material, to use your example,
yeah.
to make
It is
sure
like
that
that.
you are saying it in a way that, like, your Uncle Fred understands and your, graduate school advisor understands, that it's complete, but that it is a story to the best of your ability. We know that founders are not, that's not their expertise. But I think what I'm hearing you say is, when you have that first go-to-market person, when you have that first like real VC pitch, they're not going to come to you. They're not going to take the time to listen. They just want to hear what they want to hear, like, which is like, what are the numbers, or like, tell me the story. And if you're
Yeah,
not ready, I hate to say it, you might not get heard.
yeah. It's really focused down on what's the problem that you're solving, what's the pain point that you're solving, and tell that story very, very succinctly.
I know it's actually, I'm
I
going to interrupt you one more time and just say I've talked to a lot of founders, and just like you've said this a couple of times, and I know it sounds so rudimentary, but like, let's go back for it. You have to say the problem every single time. Every
oh
single
yeah,
time. I
yeah,
think, would you agree?
yeah. And I'd go one step further, and you got to do it with empathy.
Mm,
So, yeah, and maybe that's sort of a overused word these days, but um, most founders I've worked with, when they're pitching their stuff, talk about all the things that are interesting to them, which is the technology, which is what a great invention this is, how magical it is, how you know all of these things, and that's impressive and sometimes important, but usually the person that's investor, the customer, what have you, is interested in,
mhm.
right? They're trying to think through, how is this going to help me do my thing, do or solve my problem, or eliminate
There's a
my
level
pain.
of exhaustion too. People need
Yeah.
a
That's for
minute
sure, for sure.
to
Yeah,
lock in, like, on what, I only imagine this to be true if I was in like the defense tech space from my world, data, right? People
yeah,
come in and want to tell me a long story about data, and I'm like, please just short. Like, I'm like, what version? Like,
yeah,
what neighborhood are we in? Because
yeah. And
it's
it's
been too many things.
maybe a nicer way to say it is exhaustion. It's just people are busy, like, and we all got a lot of stuff going on, and only a limited amount mind share, and besides the fact that everything we're talking about is in a work context, but that's floating on top of whatever personal context that those you know those people right now are thinking that they're hungry. They've got to figure out how they're going to get their kids after school. They're,
I really suffer from this too. I always
that they didn't get a good night's sleep last night. That their mother is in the hospital. They're, um, so you're up against not only, the work stuff, but you're up against, just everybody trying to get through the day. And so that's where I think, yeah, being super empathetic in your mindset and just to the greatest extent possible, transporting yourself into the body of the person that you're talking to is really important. And not to generalize or to be stereotypical, but that can be hard for, tech founders,
totally.
inventors who are hard charging and they're,
I'm
they're,
curious, and you might have an
yeah,
example of this too, which is like, how do you know, like you just this process, this little, the magic trick of taking all the information and turning it into your comedy routine that works, your deck that works.
yeah,
How do you know it's working? How do you know like how do you get it really fine tuned?
yeah. I mean, I think this is where it is. There's some art in this, and it's trial and error. And I do think the comedian analogy is a really good one. How do they know their stuff is working? When they've taken it to 100 different cities in 100 different days and tried it out and just worked it into a fine paste, and they've
That's
thrown
right.
out all the bad stuff. Yeah, there's this story about Jerry Seinfeld and how he work on jokes, and he literally has them like on, like little sheets of paper, and he puts them in a file folder, and sometimes they sit there for years,
Mhm.
and he just brings them out every day. He, like literally goes to the office every day and just works on jokes. And like that's what it takes. Like to
Yeah.
get that message down to
I think the message
to its essence,
for founders
you
that I
got
would take from this is a lot of founders are high achievers who want to get a good grade. And what I
yeah,
would say is get ready for 30% of your meetings to suck. Right? A lot
yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
times,
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah,
they're not paying it. A million things go
yeah,
wrong. It's not what you wanted. You only get 5
yeah.
minutes. And I think it's quantity over quality in the beginning. Just keep going.
Yeah, and
Um,
the tendency is to inflate all the grades too, by the way. Like there's always,
oh, woof.
and
That's
even
true.
and even I do that. Like I do this, like I'm nervous and excited to do this today. I will be, nervous and excited later today when I'm on a couple of, client calls. And so that excitement generates a lot of good feeling. And so afterwards, you're always like, yeah, I think that went really well. Yeah, it's awesome. Well, yeah. And so I think it takes some time to back off of that and
Yeah.
be like, okay, honestly, how did it really get? Have we seen follow up? Have we seen, we generated some
I do
interest or
think that's right.
action?
You got to
Yeah,
be kind of
yeah,
ruthless in your mind. And one recommendation I make to young founders is like not to let people waste their time because the founder is
yeah,
the expert, right? And so I always say there's only two outcomes that matter from a first meeting, which is new relationship or second meeting. New relationship, you don't have to worry about for 6
yeah,
months. You have to just ping them
yeah,
later. Second meeting, that's a win, in my opinion. Nobody I guess because I work on really large scale stuff, nobody writes a check day
yeah.
one.
I think that I know. I think that's a neat construct. Yeah, it's good. Certainly a good practice to be a little bit ruthless in your focus. Um,
It feels bad, but that's how I
because
think.
yeah, because it feels bad to sort of um to not try to look for an opportunity in every meeting.
Totally, and everybody's so interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, mostly you meet very interesting
yeah,
people in this
yeah,
business, they're very dedicated, so I think all this makes a lot of sense from, like, what can you expect as a scientific or technical founder, as you're kinda kicking this thing off, right? And I love everything you're saying, just be ready to tell the
yeah,
story more than expose the cool technology, be focused on your time, and, treat it like, I like the stand-up comedian, some things are gonna bomb, some things are gonna go great, and after, 100 cities, you'll have it, you'll have a much better sense of it, so I really like all that. Let me take it up a level, and then I want to talk more about what you're doing. If you're an investor coming into this space, you're like, hey, I want to really get smart on and investing in environmental science. Like right now, what would you like? How are you thinking about environmental science, or what's the coolest idea you've seen, kind of at a very high level?
Yeah, and I think you asked me, what things would I like to see solutions for
Yeah.
right now? Um, if I could, in my own little dream world, if I could wish for kind of two really good problems to solve, one would be in the water space. We need a really good, simple to use solution for measuring water usage and detecting leaks in homes and buildings.
Hmm.
Water conservation is immensely important. We we waste tons and tons of water. People
Yeah.
have no idea how much water they use. You get a water bill once a quarter from your
Right.
county or whatever. You have no idea what that means. Like your utility bill is a complete surprise to you. Um, and I think it's something that people generally would care about.
Hmm.
Um,
Absolutely.
but all the solutions that exist in the market today kind of suck. Like, yeah, I feel like somewhere there's this, I have this memory in my mind of like, yeah, Steve Jobs looking at all of the digital audio players that existed before
Yeah.
the iPod,
They did also.
and
I bought
how
all of
they have
them.
like, like CD players and, cassette tech, all these things that just kind of sucked. That's sort of how the water space feels to me right now. Like all these solutions there, yeah, people use them, but they all kind of suck. And somebody needs to come along with something that's really cool. So that'd be number one.
I love that.
Um,
Can I just
yeah,
make one comment there, which is don't over one thing I like to tell founders is, don't overthink it. I mean, we all wanna do a moonshot of some kind, but that's a really humble starting place. You're not saying create a new source of potable water from
that's
like
right.
some, super
That's,
sciencey magic trick, right? Solve the whole
yeah,
problem now. What you're saying is, like, let's start with this, like, impactful chunk that we actually, as humans on the planet, could probably solve. Right? I just was meeting with another, like, medical startup that does, they were like, "Oh, we have an LLM for medical," and I was like, "Woof, okay, here we go, a bunch of science I barely understand." And what they're really focused on is diagnostic, like, just they were just like, "Yeah, a lot of cool stuff's happening. We're not remapping the genome," but, like, they're like, "What about incorrect diagnoses?" Like, and then, that's a huge problem. So, like,
right.
similar to your measurement problem, right? Like, let's just sort of start where we're at. And I think that's a real opportunity that's maybe overlooked a lot because people want to do the cool thing.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think you're right. I think that's sort of a theme for that was in my book, and certainly is true for all sort of clean tech or environmental tech, entrepreneurship is, yeah. And say when I wrote enough for the climate, one of the themes in that book, one of my theses was, hey, enough with the big, uh, kind of grand plan kind of statements and books about climate change. And here's the perfect, humongous plan. Like, let's just talk about, uh, in some cases, very small yet important incremental steps that people can take. And let's talk about all the little work that's being done by entrepreneurs, investors, and other folks that's actually, generating progress.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, many of those are simple little things
And
like,
it's not just like appealingly humble, right? It's appealing,
right.
right? We all like that message. But I would also say for investors or buyers, ideas matter, but they can grow, they can pivot, they can change
Yeah, yeah.
direction, right? Like getting one thing right is a huge accomplishment. Right, and then you can build on that. So I like that kind of simple approach. Like,
Yeah, it's
it's not the
just,
only approach.
yeah,
We need some moonshots too, but it's
yeah. I mean,
very useful.
we can call it humble, or you can just say it's focused.
Mhm.
They're you super focused on solving one part of the problem.
Right.
And we don't have to, we don't all have to solve all of it simultaneously.
Right.
Yeah. And then if we just start to generate progress in one area, that bleeds into other areas, and that creates an opportunity for, for progress in another area. Yeah. So I think that that's an important thing. If there was another climate tech, or environmental tech solution that I wish existed out there was, a replacement for every single-use plastic package that existed today.
Mm.
And there is a policy solution to this that I think, one of the things we're going to talk about is kind of the intersection with policy here. It's one of the areas where I think there's probably a very simple policy solution, but it'd be very hard to achieve.
Yeah, we
Um,
might have to do another show on this because you do talk about it in your book a little bit, which is
yeah,
because there's a topic here I do want to explore, which is just because you're a small company doesn't mean you can't affect policy. And right, like there is a
yeah,
path, and I think a lot of people don't realize that, both investors and founders, that you know there are ways to work that system, and you talk about it a little bit in the book. So I would like to kind of come back to that.
yeah. So those are the,
I like
things
those.
in terms of things where I think we have the biggest impact, um, in the near term with sort of the least amount of friction and the most mature solutions that are sort of ready to go. Um, yeah, if you told me I had to like put all of my uh clean tech effort into one sector,
Hmm.
it would be energy.
Interesting.
That's where I think you could have and we are having effectively the biggest impact the fastest in terms of decarbonizing the economy.
And is there a sector
Um,
of energy like nuclear or liquid gas
now,
or no? Okay.
no, because they're well, I guess it wouldn't be LNG you just mentioned, because I don't think it in the long run it's necessary. But you know, there's all kinds of low carbon, zero carbon energy solutions that are mature and cost effective and
Yeah.
widely available today. In fact, it's funny. I just read like 2 days ago that for the first time in the U.S., more than 50% of power was being generated from renewable
Huh. That's really
sources.
exciting. I did
And
not know that.
it's seasonal, right? So we're in the for most of the US right now, people a little nerdy energy thing, but we're in what's called kind of the saddle season. So we're in the low demand part of the year, and it's springtime. So solar and wind production is approaching its peak, and energy demand is approaching its saddle. It's its low point for the
I got
year.
you.
So
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why it's happening. But if you looked at those two graphs over the last decade or so, the you know the percentage of energy usage and from renewable sources, it's it's consistently increased. Finally gotten to the crossover moment. Um,
Yeah. That's
and
amazing.
the vast majority of new energy supply coming online is from renewable. It's from wind and solar and batteries and nuclear and other you know low carbon, zero carbon sources of power are being developed at vastly faster now than other sources. So to me, that's
What do you think
if
the impact of the recent, despite no matter the politics of it, but there's been a lot of change in policy there in terms of renewables and kind of green efforts. Do you think that's going to have any long term impact or be a blip or
yeah,
something?
I
Is that something investors should consider at all?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah,
too
I
early.
wish I was smart enough to know. It'll for sure it's got to have some kind of dampening effect because people just pay attention to the rhetoric. Um, and the policies were quite good, although they didn't get implemented nearly fast enough.
Yeah.
Everybody who tried to get a DOE GRIP grant for grid modernization, had a hard time getting it, right? Because it
Mhm.
took them forever to process the darn program and then to get the billions of dollars out the door
It could be an opportunity
to
for
make it
venture,
work.
though, right? If things are a
Yeah,
little bit jammed up.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the bottom line is you need all the sources of funds that are that are
Available.
available. So
Okay.
and beyond just energy supply, we're also electrifying more and more things, right? We're in the midst of taking most of the transportation sector and moving from a fossil fuel based energy source to an electric based energy source, right?
Amazing.
Like,
Right.
if you think about that, it's right now it's mostly the adoption of EVs for personal auto usage, but then it's going to be other forms of transportation as well. To me, this is a humongous growth opportunity for the utility sector,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure they know how to take advantage of it. But
Oh, that's
but others
interesting.
others certainly can. I mean, we're taking almost the entire transportation sector and weaning it off of fossil fuel.
Yeah, no, it's a not trivial cultural divide that you see in a lot of different industries that are really getting the the evolution of the new tech is so fast. Even for me, I feel out of breath. And then the kind of the arbiters of scale, the
Yeah.
right are I think they're willing, but it's a cultural issue. They've got to kind of learn to move at this speed. There's a lot of complexity behind it, but I think I often notice the kind of cultural differences between the types of organizations that build this stuff and the types that have to adopt it. And even when everybody's a willing participant, it can be tricky. I think.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I
this is
want
where
to,
I think it boils down to the product. If the product's good, and it is, and it's getting better faster,
yeah.
um, then the rest of it kind of flows with
Well,
that. And
I'm a
then,
product manager at heart, so that's what I've done most of my career,
yeah,
and so
yeah,
you're not gonna get any argument from me. I always sort of feel like, the most important thing is the product, right? And if the
yeah,
product becomes unassailable,
right.
then you'll be able to move forward.
Yeah, and so it ends up kind of being that product adoption curve. People will maybe hit at different stages of that curve depending on lots of things that can be cultural, political, or their tastes and preferences, right?
Yeah,
Mm, hit 'em differently. I would say,
not
in addition to the transportation sector, there's also a huge opportunity to electrify most of um, the built environment. Meaning everything that we do for climate control, heating and cooling of buildings, basically, um, and all the processes within those buildings. Whereas right now, a lot of that's fossil fuel based.
yeah, let me ask about
Um,
that, because I think that relates to
yeah,
your new company. Looking
yeah,
at yeah,
yeah,
right? And so it might be a good pivot point to talk a little bit
yeah,
about what you've been doing. So I'm not familiar with the company. Can you just kinda tell me
yeah, yeah. That's okay.
I'll hold you to your earlier comments. Please tell me what problem you're solving.
Yeah, that's okay. So, well, and you're right with certainly with, and I saw this when I after I wrote the book and was really kind of looking for what's my next you know you know journey going to be. Um, I saw a huge limiting factor in management and resiliency and reliability of the electric grid and the safety of the electric grid. And also huge growth in how much energy, meaning electricity, that all of
Mm,
us use, either professionally and in a commercial industrial capacity, or just in our regular day-to-day lives. If I have a home and that home used to have a gas furnace and a gas water heater and a gasoline powered car parked in front of it, and it had lots of lights and electronics, but now it's got even more of those things. And I'm using AI for increasing the amount of stuff. And now I have an electric stove, an electric oven, an electric, everything's electric, right? So there's if you think about that, there's just, even in our personal lives, there is a greater proportion, almost 100% of our day-to-day energy use that's been electrified.
That's
And
amazing. And
it can easily be done so
mhm.
because all those solutions exist at scale,
And
right?
kind
And
of
they're all
bringing together
great.
a couple of ideas though, right? You're talking about like how do we measure what we're doing? And then we've got every building getting
Right, right.
electrified. And I'm a big one for like large scale transformation. This looks like an opportunity to me. If you're cracking open every building, if you're part of every
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
new build, then I think there's an opportunity for sensor technology to kind of
Right.
advance, right?
Yeah, so long preamble. So what does Whisker Labs do? So Whisker Labs really has a couple of different businesses that we're in. Uh, but the principal business that what the company got started with, and this is an interesting example of how being sort of practical can lead to climate solutions. So what we discovered was that we could detect the precursors to electrically related fires in homes and buildings.
Mm.
So rather than just, like a smoke detector detecting when a fire is
Can I ask you a
occurring.
I have a curiosity
Yeah,
question
go
now real
ahead.
quick, 'cause like
Yeah,
I'm a little bit older. My mother was, kind of older, and this was the whole thing. Don't leave this plugged in. That's gonna follow everything's gonna be an electrical fire. That was the biggest concern I grew up
right,
with.
right, right.
And is that still a thing? Like, is that still a thing to worry about? And like,
Yeah,
how often does that
yeah, for
happen?
sure. Yeah, no, it's
Ah,
yeah,
I was hoping it was an
it's a
urban myth so that I could
no,
like
no, no.
feel
Well,
better about
yeah, I
leaving all the
mean,
lights on.
I don't know your mother, maybe a little
It's
overly
real.
cautious. I don't want to give the impression that everybody's house is about to combust, but we found a really novel, practical, easy to adopt way for people to deploy one device, three-prong outlet in their home called Ting. The device is called Ting. Um, and, and with that device, we could predict and prevent over 80% of electrically related fires in homes. So that means fires that not only come from, say, a problem with the electrical wiring or a bad switch or a bad outlet or a breaker in your breaker box, but also any of the devices that you have connected to your
Oh, that's the
home.
thing.
So think
Mhm.
of power strips, appliances, your Christmas lights, all those kinds of things that
Gaming
are fire
computers,
hazards.
all that stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
computers, yeah, so all that kind of stuff, and then also, interestingly, um, about 40% of the fire hazards that we detect are actually, coming from the utility connection to the home, to a building. So it's basically bad power coming from the utility
Mm, interesting.
that creates, fire hazards, in the home. So we detect all this stuff, and then we have a process by which we work with the home or building owners to further diagnose and mitigate whatever that issue is. So, we've proven that we can help prevent, uh, the majority of these types of fires. And so our business model is that, you can imagine that loss prevention benefit
Mhm.
is super valuable for insurers,
Ah,
for insurance
yeah.
companies. So we work with insurance companies like State Farm and Nationwide, Pure, many others, about 30 companies in total. And they actually provide our device, Ting, they for free to their policyholders, their customers. And obviously the claims reduction, the loss prevention benefit basically comes back to the insurer, and we got a positive ROI just based on how much we can save the insurer in reduced claims.
Mhm.
So that's all really interesting, right? That's
Yeah.
for me, that's personally gratifying. We're happy to help, predict and prevent these types of losses. I will say that technology, talk about magic. So we talk about, kind of magical technical things. The technology that goes into that is incredibly complicated. Like it's funny, I wrote my book 2, 3 years ago. There's the word AI doesn't exist in the book, but now of course that's all we talk about. And our company utilizes AI to monitor the voltage signals and related signals within the building to detect these types of fire hazards. And we couldn't do it without massive quantities of of AI and machine learning and image recognition
It wasn't
optimization.
possible before. I mean, that's kind of my
No, it was
domain.
not. It
It
would take,
wasn't possible. It was too much signal.
yeah, there, I mean, it would take teams of like thousands and thousands of
Yeah.
people to try to do it.
Yeah.
So because we're measuring, voltage and features of voltage within a building at 30 megahertz. So that means we're taking 30 million samples a second. So
Impressive.
it's a crazy amount of data. And then utilizing AI and machine learning to do a couple things. One is do exception processing, look for suspicious things and all that data, compress it, send it back so that we don't, break your Wi-Fi connection with one little sensor, and then turn all that data into pictures, like almost like movies,
Mhm.
because they're updating every second. And then use AI and machine learning, almost like you would use facial recognition technology, or the way,
Is it
EV,
a pattern?
self-driving car uses technology AI to spot lines in the middle of the road, or a stop sign, or a yield sign, or a kid on a bike, or whatever. Right? That's all,
Right.
AI driven. We're doing the same thing to look for the signals in that data that are consistent with known fire hazards. So now take this one step further. We have about 1.1 million Tings deployed across the US, and we're scaling that at about 50,000 Tings every month. So
Mm.
50,000. So there's a Ting within a mile of 95% of the US population. So we can see not only what's happening inside buildings and homes, but also what's happening across the electric grid.
Mm.
So we see, for example, and this has been widely reported in the news, the grid faults that may have caused some of the LA fires. There are over 2,000 fires a year that are caused by
Yeah.
wildfires they're caused by grid faults, by problems with the electric grid.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and beyond that, just overall, the resiliency, safety, and reliability of the electric grid is
That I have
decreasing.
heard.
And
Yeah, that's yeah.
it's under a great deal of stress because of the trends that we talked about earlier with the electrification of just about everything. And so we're able to actually see what's happening on the entire grid. That data set, that sort of independent, comprehensive, third-party, national scale data set for what's happening on the grid, never existed before. Like, not even close. So
Perfect example of what we were talking about before, the sort of measurement, just knowing where we're at,
yeah, just
right?
know it. So,
I can't
before
emphasize this
this,
enough.
if
This is a
you
problem in corporate America too. You ask a bank, exactly how much money do you have? They're like, well,
right,
exactly. It's
right.
really for these complex systems that have evolved asymmetrically. The things you think oh, the government must know this. They don't know. And without that baseline
No,
information,
that's
then
right.
what do you do?
No, so I'll use a simple example here. Um, when the power goes out in your home, do you think your utility knows?
Oh, I only know this because the power goes out every 5 minutes at my house. They
So
don't know.
yeah, they're right on, right? They don't know most of the time. We're making a
There's a
general
lot of
case
tree
here.
cover here, so
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times they don't know. They know when you call them and tell them that it's
mhm.
out. So not only does the power company not know when your power's out, neither does, if you think
The
of the
feds or
electric
the
grid as
yeah.
being arguably the most important sector of critical infrastructure that we
Yeah,
have in the U.S.
you would think like the DOJ, like the DOD
Yeah,
would
yeah.
have this,
Maybe the
right?
DOE or FERC or somebody would actually know what's going on. And the truth is they generally don't. Or if they do,
It's
they're
asymmetrical and
relying upon information that they get from the utilities. So it's self-reporting from the utilities. And as we just said, the utilities don't know when the power's out.
well, first of all, I want one. I just mentioned I have a huge problem with this, and it's a great business model that is, I think, effective from a making money perspective, but also uplifting because there's good like secondary level data that's coming out that could help everybody. How's the company doing? Like, where are you as a young company? Like,
Yeah, I mean, Well, like as I mentioned, we're growing quite rapidly. We now have over 1 million customers, scaling at about 50,000 new customers every month.
That's great.
More and more working more and more with insurance companies.
Mhm.
Um, but
So do you
also,
sell both direct to consumer and like through a secondary
yeah,
market? Okay.
yeah, the vast majority of our business is through our really awesome insurance partners,
That
companies
makes
like State
sense.
Farm. But we do have a direct to consumer presence that's growing. So you can find our stuff on Amazon or on our website. Um, you
Yeah, and
know,
I'll
and-
I'll link it in the show notes on the site too.
okay, yeah. So lots of good stuff happening there. But then, yeah, like we said, this is where, and maybe this is back to the theme of the show here around innovation and entrepreneurship, and how one thing leads to the next, to the next, to the next. We really see a huge opportunity in utilizing the data to help improve performance and operation and safety, reliability, resiliency of the nation's electric grid. And that, back to sort of, big climate themes, the grid is really a limiting factor
Hmm.
in the further adoption and growth of the electrification of everything so that we can decarbonize it all. So if I get back to sort of this
Yeah.
sort of thesis of, hey, if I could do anything to sort of work towards a more sustainable climate faster, it would be to electrify as much stuff as fast as possible.
Mhm.
And at least one of the big limitations of that is the ability of the grid to handle all the power and do it in a way that's sustainable, efficient, reliable, and not creating all kinds of problems like what we saw in LA. And part of what you need to affect that kind of change is better data.
Well, you're gonna
You
get an
know,
argument from me. Nah.
yeah. So
Um, you know,
that's where we're at. That's
yeah.
where
But
hopefully
I really do
with
like that.
Whisker Labs
Yeah.
can
So I
help
would say if
be
you're
a
listening
part of
right
the
now,
solution.
get a Ting.
Here's a
Electrify
thing.
your home and office. Oh, nice. Just goes into I'm very glad it just goes into an electrical outlet because I don't
It's
you don't have to put it in the
yeah.
wall or anything, so that's great.
It's
But
it's a it's a 2-minute install, not even, maybe
and then
90
at a
seconds.
larger level, yeah, you gotta think about this as a founder, like, what are the focused, as you said, maybe not humble, but, like, what are the focus problems, where it is worth asking, like, what do we know today? And also like what you're talking about in terms of, like, the grid is this, like, limiter, but that's also an opportunity, right? To get that information. So I think, these have all been great topics, Jim. Thank you so much for,
Yeah.
joining us today. I'm gonna put, a link to Ting in the, show notes as well as to the books. And just really appreciate you coming on today and helping us give a little sage advice to our scientific and technology founders.
Thanks very much. Happy to help. Good to see you.